The city breathed in shadows that night. A cold fog curled through the narrow streets like a living thing, clinging to iron gates and stone walls, swallowing the glow of lanterns one by one. London never slept, but it did whisper. And on that particular evening, its whispers carried sorrow, fear, and the faintest trace of hope. Inside a modest rented room on the edge of the city, a young widow sat beside a bed far too small for the weight it carried. Her daughter lay there, fragile as porcelain, her tiny chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven breaths. Fever had painted her cheeks red, yet her hands were icy cold. Every breath felt borrowed. The woman pressed her lips to her child's forehead, forcing herself not to cry. Tears would help no one. Panic would help even less. She had already done the unthinkable. Earlier that day, she had walked through the heavy doors of the doctor's office with her head held high and her heart breaking. She had explained her situation calmly, the illness, the fever, the nights without sleep. And then came the question she feared most. "How will you be paying today, madam?" Her silence had answered before she could. The doctor, though not unkind, had closed his ledger. Sympathy did not keep practices running. Medicine was not charity. By nightfall she had nothing left. No coins, no favors, no one to turn to except one last name. Now, by the trembling light of a candle nearing its end, she unfolded a sheet of paper she had saved for years, not for writing letters, but for remembering a life that once felt safer. Her hand shook as she dipped the pen in ink. She did not write as a beggar. She wrote as a mother. Each word was careful, dignified, honest. She spoke of loss, but not bitterness, of hardship, but not resentment, of her daughter's illness, but never once asked for pity, only help. She addressed the letter to a distant relative, a branch of the family long separated by time and circumstance, an old address, written from memory. She had no way of knowing that the house no longer belonged to her blood. She sealed the envelope with trembling fingers and whispered a prayer. That single letter, born from desperation and love, would leave her hands that night. She had no idea it was destined for a man who had everything she had lost, nor that it would quietly cross the invisible line between two worlds that were never meant to meet. Miles away, beyond the fog and the cramped streets, stood a grand estate where candlelight did not flicker from fear, only from habit. A duke's house, a powerful name. A life protected from illness, hunger, and unanswered prayers. And soon a letter would arrive, one written to the wrong man, but perhaps to the only one who would truly read it. And London, ever watchful, seemed to hold its breath. Morning arrived at the Duke's residence with quiet precision. Sunlight filtered through tall windows framed by heavy curtains, touching polished wood, marble floors, and the kind of silence that existed only in houses where nothing was ever lacking. Servants moved softly, trained to be invisible. Breakfast was laid before the Duke even entered the room. Everything was expected, everything was ordered, everything was empty. The Duke of Ravenshire stood by the window, one hand resting behind his back, staring out at the manicured gardens below. From this height, the world looked manageable, predictable, safe. He was a man admired by society and tolerated by gossip. Young enough to be whispered about, old enough to be respected, wealthy enough to be untouchable, and utterly uninterested in it all. A valet approached, clearing his throat gently. "Your correspondence? Your Grace?" The Duke nodded without turning. Letters rarely held surprises. Invitations to balls. Requests for patronage. Carefully worded praise followed by subtle demands. He took the stack absently, flipping through it as he crossed the room, until one envelope stopped him. It was simple, almost painfully so. No crest, no seal, no careful flourishes, just a woman's handwriting, neat, restrained, humble. He frowned slightly. This letter did not belong among the rest. He broke the seal without ceremony and began to read. By the third line, he had stopped walking. By the fifth, he was seated. By the end, the room felt strangely smaller. The letter spoke of loss, a husband gone, a future uncertain. It spoke of a child with fevered nights and shallow breaths, of dignity maintained even when hope had thinned to a fragile thread. There was no manipulation in the words, no entitlement, no accusation, only honesty and restraint. She did not demand, she did not beg, she did not even assume he would answer. She simply explained and trusted. The Duke lowered the letter slowly. This was not written for him. That much was clear. The address was wrong, the family name unfamiliar in its connection. The woman believed she was writing to kin, distant, perhaps forgotten, but still bound by blood. A mistake, a simple, harmless mistake. He could have passed it along, returned it unopened, dismissed it as not his concern. Instead, he read it again and again. Something about her words unsettled him. Perhaps it was the way she refused to dramatize her suffering, or the quiet strength hidden between lines meant only to inform, not persuade. It reminded him of something he had not felt in years, responsibility, not the kind demanded by title or estate, but the kind no one saw. He rang the bell. When his steward entered, the Duke was already writing, not a reply, an instruction. "Have this sum delivered," he said calmly, sliding the paper across the desk. Discreetly, no return name, no expectation. The steward hesitated. "Your Grace, is this a gift?" The Duke interrupted. "Nothing more, nothing less." The money left the estate that very day. No announcement, no credit, no witness. And yet, miles away, in a narrow room filled with fear and whispered prayers, a miracle quietly arrived. The widow stood frozen as the coins were placed in her trembling hands. Enough for the doctor, enough for medicine, enough for breath. She did not cry out, she did not collapse, she simply sat and wept silently. That night, for the first time in weeks, her daughter slept peacefully. And in the days that followed, color slowly returned to the little girl's face. Life resumed its fragile rhythm. The widow kept the envelope hidden beneath her mattress, taking it out only to remind herself that kindness still existed, somewhere, unseen. Weeks passed, and gratitude, when left unspoken, grows heavy. One evening, once her daughter laughed again, a sound she feared she had lost forever, the widow sat at the table and picked up her pen. She wrote back, not with questions, not with curiosity, but with thanks. She described her daughter's recovery, her renewed faith, her promise to repay, someday, in any way possible. She signed the letter simply, no title, no demand, no assumption. The Duke received it 2 mornings later. He smiled before he realized he was doing so, and for reasons he could not yet explain. He wrote back, "Letters have a peculiar power. They wait. They do not interrupt. They do not demand. They arrive quietly and remain patient, allowing hearts to open only when they are ready." The widow's reply reached the Duke on a grey afternoon, folded with care, sealed not with wax but with restraint. He read it standing this time. She did not ask questions. She did not inquire about his name, his station, or his intentions. She wrote only of gratitude, sincere, unembellished, and deeply human. Her daughter had laughed again. That single sentence struck him harder than any plea ever could. The Duke sat at his desk, letter still in hand, and stared at the blank page before him for a long moment. He had intended to help once and vanish. That had been the sensible choice. Yet here he was, writing again. He chose his words carefully. He did not sign his name. He did not mention his title. He did not correct her assumption that he was merely a distant relative. He wrote as a man, not a duke. Their correspondence settled into an unspoken rhythm, 1 letter every other day, never hurried, never excessive. She wrote of small victories, a better night's sleep, a child's appetite returning, a neighbor's kindness. Sometimes she allowed a gentle humor to slip through, poking fun at her own stubborn pride or the absurdity of life's timing. He wrote back with warmth disguised as practicality. He offered advice, encouragement, and occasionally observations about the world beyond her narrow street. He surprised himself with how much he enjoyed it. For the first time in years, no one wanted anything from him. She did not flatter. She did not perform. She did not fear him. She believed him to be ordinary, and in those pages, he almost was. The Duke began to look forward to the mornings, to the sound of footsteps outside his door, to the weight of an envelope in his hands. He smiled more, listened more, lived differently. And the widow. She felt something unfamiliar bloom within her, not dependence, not expectation, connection. She imagined him as kind, perhaps older, perhaps living modestly like herself, a man shaped by family rather than fortune. She trusted him with thoughts she had not spoken aloud since her husband's passing. She laughed while writing, sometimes blushed at herself. She had not intended for affection to grow, yet it did, quietly, respectfully, between the lines. And oh, how letters love such spaces. Now, dear listener, permit a brief pause. For what is unfolding here is no mere exchange of ink and paper. This is the slow, delicious danger of intimacy without faces. Tell me, do you believe affection can grow without knowing a name? If you wish, I would love to read your opinion in the comments. Your thoughts, like these letters, may arrive softly, but they matter deeply. Now, shall we continue? Weeks passed. London bloomed into early spring, and with it, the widow's life began to stabilize. Her daughter grew stronger by the day, chasing light across the small room with laughter that felt like redemption itself. Yet joy, once tasted, sharpens loss. One evening, after finishing a letter filled with gratitude and gentle teasing, the widow paused. She reread his last words. They were kind, thoughtful, careful, in a way that suddenly felt distant. Something had changed. His replies grew shorter, less frequent. Days passed without a letter, then more. The widow told herself she was foolish to notice. He owed her nothing. He had already given more than she deserved. Still, silence has a voice of its own. She waited and waited, until hope thinned once more, not from poverty this time, but from uncertainty. She sat at the table one final evening and unfolded her paper. This letter was different. It was not filled with stories, nor humor. It was a farewell. She thanked him again, fully, humbly. She offered to repay the kindness in any way life might allow, and she released him from obligation, assuring him she would understand if he never wrote again. She sealed the letter with steady hands, and sent it. Miles away, the Duke would soon read words he had not expected to receive, words that would undo his silence and force him to choose. The Duke did not intend to disappear. Silence, however, has a way of growing when fear is fed. He stood in his study long after midnight. The widow's last warm letter folded and unfolded so many times it bore soft creases along the edges. The words were gentle, familiar, too familiar. They knew him now. Not his name, not his title, but the man beneath them. And that frightened him more than any scandal ever could. He had lived his life protected by distance. His wealth allowed generosity without attachment, compassion without consequence. But these letters, they were no longer acts of kindness. They were invitations to truth, to presence, to vulnerability, and presence for a duke was dangerous. London society was not kind to women who crossed invisible lines. A widow without fortune, without connections, whispered about, judged, dissected. He imagined her face exposed to gossip, her daughter marked by association, a kindness twisted into scandal. He could not allow it, and so he did nothing. Days passed, then weeks. He instructed his staff to hold his correspondence, claiming matters of estate demanded his attention. He told himself it was temporary, a pause to protect her. Yet protection, when unspoken, feels like abandonment. The widow waited, at first patiently, then with unease. Each morning she listened for footsteps that never came. Each evening she folded her hands, convincing herself that gratitude did not require response. But nights are honest. At night, she reread his last letter until the words blurred. Had she written too freely? Had she imagined closeness where none existed? She scolded herself for foolish hope. He had been kind, nothing more. The realization stung sharper than poverty ever had. One afternoon, after watching her daughter play near the window, alive, laughing, healed, the widow made her decision. She would not wait in uncertainty. She would write once more. This final letter was composed with dignity and restraint. She thanked him fully, releasing him from any sense of obligation. She offered her help in return, not as repayment, but as respect. And then she said goodbye. No bitterness, no accusation, only grace. The letter left her hands on a quiet morning. 2 days later, it arrived at the Duke's estate. He recognized the handwriting instantly and felt something break. He read it, standing, then sat, then stood again. Each sentence stripped away the comfort of his justifications. She had not demanded explanation. She had not begged for return. She had understood his silence as charity fulfilled. That thought, that he would be remembered only as a distant benefactor, unsettled him deeply. This was not how it was meant to end. He realized then what his silence had cost. Not scandal, not reputation, connection, and worse, courage. The Duke folded the letter carefully and placed it in his coat pocket. London had taught him to hide behind walls, but this woman, unknowingly, had shown him what those walls truly were, not protection, but fear. That very evening, the Duke made a decision that would alter the course of both their lives. He would go to her, not as a benefactor, not as a distant relative, not as a shadow behind ink and paper, but as himself. The carriage was prepared before dawn, and London, heavy with secrets, stirred once more. The carriage wheels cut through the early morning fog, steady and relentless. Inside, the Duke sat in silence, his gloved hands resting on his knees, his thoughts anything but still. He had travelled countless roads in his life, to estates, to Parliament, to grand houses where his arrival was announced before he even stepped inside. This journey was different. No title preceded him, no invitation awaited him, no certainty guided him. Only a letter, only a woman whose voice he knew better than her face. As the city faded behind them, replaced by open fields and winding roads, doubt crept in. What would she see when she looked at him? Gratitude, confusion, fear, or worse, disappointment. He had prepared explanations, rehearsed apologies, yet none of them felt sufficient. How does one explain kindness that turned into longing? Silence chosen out of fear, affection born without permission. Hours later, the carriage slowed near a modest village. The Duke stepped down and dismissed the driver. He would walk the rest of the way. The street was narrow, lined with simple homes, each bearing signs of honest labor. Children played nearby, their laughter unguarded. A woman greeted him politely, unaware of the title he carried so carefully within. He followed the directions he had memorized from her letters. At last, he stood before the house. It was smaller than he imagined, but warm. Light filtered through the window. A faint sound of humming drifted into the street, soft, tender, alive. He hesitated. Inside, the widow was setting bread on the table when a knock sounded at the door. She froze. No one ever knocked at this hour. She wiped her hands on her apron and approached slowly, heart quickening for reasons she could not name. When she opened the door, the man before her was nothing like she had imagined, and yet unmistakably him. She knew his eyes. She had read them 100 times. For a moment, neither spoke. He began, then stopped. Titles felt absurd here. I owe you an apology. Her expression shifted, confusion giving way to something sharper. You are not my relative, she said quietly. No, you are the one who sent the money. Yes. Understanding struck like a sudden chill. You let me believe. I did, he said, his voice low. And for that, I am deeply sorry. Silence filled the space between them, heavy and fragile. She stepped back instinctively, fear rising. A duke, a stranger, a powerful man standing at her threshold. I did not come to frighten you, he said gently. I came because I could no longer hide. She looked at him then, truly looked. Not at the wealth implied by his coat, nor the authority in his posture, but at the uncertainty in his eyes. Why? She asked. Why help me at all? He paused. I do not fully know, he admitted, perhaps because your letter reminded me of something I had forgotten, or perhaps because kindness, once offered, asked something of me in return. She crossed her arms, steadying herself. I am grateful, she said carefully, but I will not be pitied. I never pitied you, he replied at once. I admired you. That startled her. Before she could respond, a small voice echoed from within the house. Mama! The widow turned instantly. Her daughter stood in the doorway, healthy, bright-eyed, alive. The Duke's breath caught. This was the life he had touched. This was the consequence of a letter, and suddenly everything became real. The widow looked back at him, her gaze unreadable. You should come inside, she said at last. We have much to say. And he followed her across the threshold, stepping fully into a story that could no longer be written from afar. The house smelled of warm bread and quiet courage. The Duke sat at the small wooden table, his long legs awkwardly folded beneath it, acutely aware of how out of place he looked. The chair creaked under his weight. He noticed it immediately, and almost smiled. The widow placed a teacup before him. I'm afraid it isn't very grand, she said, glancing at the plain china. It's perfect, he replied without hesitation. I've attended banquets far less sincere. That earned him a brief, reluctant smile. She poured tea with steady hands, though her thoughts were anything but calm. Across from her sat a man who had changed her life, quietly, anonymously, and then vanished. You should know, she began, meeting his eyes, I do not welcome surprises easily. I suspected as much, he said gently. She lifted an eyebrow. And yet you came unannounced. Yes, he admitted. I feared if I asked, I would lose my nerve. That drew a soft huff of laughter from her. Unexpected, fleeting. They spoke cautiously at first. Of the journey, of the weather, of her daughter's health. The Duke listened intently, asking questions with genuine concern. He knelt to speak to the little girl at eye level, earning her immediate trust, a victory he did not take lightly. Soon, the distance between them softened. Then came truth. I should have told you who I was, he said at last, but I feared what my name would do to your words. She studied him carefully. And now I fear what silence did instead. She considered that. You let me believe you were someone else. I did, he said. And I regret it deeply. Her voice softened, but did not yield. You helped me when no one else would. That matters. But honesty matters too. I know. They sat in thoughtful quiet. Then she surprised him. You do not speak like other men of rank, she said. I try not to, he replied dryly. They are terribly dull. She laughed, a real one this time. "Be careful, Your Grace," she teased gently. "Scandal begins with charm." His eyes warmed. "Then I fear I am already ruined." The afternoon passed more easily than either expected. Stories replaced caution. Humor slipped between confessions. Respect grew where suspicion once lived. As dusk approached, the Duke rose. "I will not overstay," he said. "I wanted only to apologize, and to ensure your daughter truly recovered." She nodded. "Thank you." He paused at the door. "I would like to write again," he said quietly. "But this time, with truth." Her breath caught, just slightly. "I would like that," she replied. As he stepped outside, she watched him go, unsettled, intrigued, and undeniably changed. She closed the door slowly, and realized, with a sudden rush of warmth and fear, that the man who once lived only in ink now occupied a very real place in her heart. The Duke returned to London a changed man. The city noticed. At first, it was subtle, a missed invitation, a distracted expression during conversations that once bored him but never unsettled him. He stood apart at gatherings, listening less to gossip and more to his own thoughts. And his thoughts were never in London. They were in a quiet village, in a modest house, in the sound of a woman's laughter that arrived unguarded and real. He began to write again, this time with honesty. His letters no longer hid behind half-truths. He did not flaunt his title, but neither did he disguise it. He spoke openly of his responsibilities, his unease with society, his discomfort with expectations he had never chosen. The widow read every word carefully. She appreciated the truth, but truth carried weight. She wrote back with warmth, yet caution. She spoke of her daily life, her daughter's progress, her gratitude that remained sincere but grounded. She did not ask for promises. She did not need them. Their bond deepened not through fantasy, but through respect. Meanwhile, London stirred. At a grand ballroom lit by chandeliers and ambition, whispers began to coil like smoke. "The Duke has been absent. He refuses introductions. He seems preoccupied." Eyes followed him more closely now. At one such event, a young lady of excellent lineage approached him with deliberate grace. Her mother watched eagerly from across the room. "My lord," the lady said sweetly, "you have been difficult to find of late." "So I've been told," the Duke replied politely. "You must allow us to remedy that," she continued. "London has missed you." He smiled, courteous, distant. "I find London rarely notices what truly matters." The remark spread quickly, and with it, curiosity. Why would a duke, once considered the most eligible gentleman of the season, withdraw so completely? The answer arrived sooner than expected. One afternoon, as the Duke exited a bookseller's shop, he noticed a familiar figure across the street, the widow. She stood frozen, clutching a parcel, her expression caught between wonder and alarm. She had come to London reluctantly, only to consult a specialist for her daughter. She had hoped to remain invisible. Instead, she was standing in the heart of the city, face to face with a world that did not belong to her. The Duke crossed the street without hesitation. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Her voice wavered. "I did not expect to see you here." "Nor I you," he said, though relief warmed his tone. Eyes turned, noticed, watched. This was no private meeting now. This was London. The widow felt the shift immediately, the weight of judgment, the sharp assessment in glances that measured her dress, her posture, her worth. She stepped back instinctively. "This was a mistake," she murmured. "No," he said firmly. "This is simply inconvenient timing." She met his gaze. "Your world is not kind to women like me." "I know," he said. "That is why I must choose carefully." The words hung between them. Choose society, with its comfort and approval, or truth, with its risk. The Duke offered his arm, not as command but invitation. She hesitated, then took it. Across the street, whispers ignited, and somewhere within the glittering halls of London, scandal quietly found its beginning. The ballroom glittered like a promise it never intended to keep. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in golden light, reflecting off silk gowns and polished shoes, while the air hummed with polite laughter and unspoken judgment. Music flowed effortlessly, practiced and precise, much like the people gathered beneath it. The Duke entered without hesitation. At his side walked the widow, not hidden, not announced, simply present. The effect was immediate. Conversations faltered, fans paused mid-air, eyes followed them with open curiosity and quiet calculation. She felt it all at once, the weight of the room pressing inward. Every step required effort, every breath demanded composure. She straightened her shoulders. If she was to be seen, she would not shrink. The Duke leaned closer, his voice low. "You are not alone," he said, "and you owe no one an explanation." Her lips curved slightly. "That may be true, but London rarely agrees." They moved through the room together, his presence a shield that did not suffocate, but steadied. Still, whispers followed. A widow. No fortune. Does she even belong here? A woman of high society approached, her smile sharp with politeness. "My lord," she said sweetly, eyes flicking toward the widow. "How unexpected." "So is honesty," the Duke replied calmly. "Yet here we are." The woman laughed thinly and moved on. The widow exhaled. "Thank you," she murmured. "For what?" "For choosing courage over comfort." He looked at her then, truly looked, and something unmistakable passed between them. Affection no longer hidden. Music swelled. He offered his hand. "May I?" She hesitated only a moment. "Yes." They stepped onto the floor. The dance was not grand. It did not seek attention, but its simplicity was its rebellion. They moved in quiet harmony, laughter escaping in soft bursts when missteps occurred. At one point, she whispered, amused, "You dance better than you write." He smirked. "An accusation I accept." For a fleeting moment, the world receded. Then reality returned. Across the room, eyes narrowed, calculations were made, reputations weighed. This was no longer a private affection. This was a challenge. As the music ended, applause followed, polite, measured, laced with implication. The Duke escorted her from the floor. "I fear," he said softly, "that this evening will not end kindly." She met his gaze, resolute. "I have survived far worse than whispers." He admired her more for it. Yet as they parted for the night, uncertainty crept in. London had seen them, and London never forgets. Tomorrow, choices would be demanded. By morning, the city was already talking. It always did. Ink met paper faster than truth could catch its breath, and by the time the Duke rose from his bed, society had decided it knew everything. A wealthy Duke, a widowed woman, a ballroom, a dance. London required no further details. At breakfast, invitations arrived, not to include him, but to observe him. Subtle interrogations disguised as tea, curiosity dressed as concern. The Duke declined them all. Instead, he walked through streets that had once felt like armor and now felt like exposure. Every passerby seemed to glance twice. Every whisper felt louder than the last. Meanwhile, the widow felt the consequences more sharply. She sensed it in the shopkeeper's hesitation, in the neighbor's careful politeness, in the sudden attention she had never sought. Her world had grown smaller. Not from poverty this time, but from scrutiny. That afternoon, the Duke arrived unannounced. "I should not have brought you into this," he said immediately. She closed the door behind him, calm but firm. "You did not," she replied. "London did." He studied her face, searching for regret. He found none. "I need to know," she continued, "whether you regret standing beside me." He did not hesitate. "No." The answer steadied something between them. Still, reality demanded more than affection. "If this continues," she said carefully, "your reputation will suffer." "My reputation," he said, "has always been negotiable." She shook her head gently. "Mine is not." Silence followed, not heavy, but honest. He understood then what love truly asked, not possession, not rescue, choice. "I will not place you in shadows," he said quietly, "nor will I ask you to endure what you do not choose." She met his gaze. "And if I choose you?" Hope flickered. Dangerous, beautiful. Before either could speak further, the world interrupted once more. Ah, dear listener, London is aflutter, and not without reason. A duke dancing beyond expectation, a widow refusing to bow beneath judgment, and society clutching its pearls as if that might restore order. Now tell me, should love submit to rules it never agreed to follow? If you wish, I would truly love to read your opinion in the comments. Your thoughts, much like London's whispers, shape what comes next. Now, let us return. That evening, a formal letter arrived at the Duke's residence. An invitation, no, a summons, a gathering of influence, titles, expectations, an unspoken ultimatum. Appear and correct the narrative. The Duke folded the letter slowly. Across the city, the widow stood by her window, watching dusk settle. She understood instinctively. This was the moment. He arrived just before nightfall. "I must go," he told her honestly, "but I will not decide without you." She breathed deeply. "Then go," she said, "and return only if your choice remains the same." He reached for her hand. "For the first time," he said softly, "it does." As he left, London waited, and so did fate. The room fell silent as the Duke entered. This was not a ballroom of music and charm, but one of influence and expectation. Men and women of rank turned toward him with polite interest, sharpened by curiosity. This was the moment London believed it could reclaim him. He stood alone at the center of it all. When questions came, they were not asked directly. They never were. "Rumors have been enthusiastic," one gentleman remarked lightly. "A misunderstanding, surely," added another. The Duke listened. Then, calmly, he spoke. "There is no misunderstanding." The room stilled. "I chose to help a woman because she deserved kindness," he continued. "I chose to stand beside her because she deserved respect, and I will not deny either choice to preserve comfort." Murmurs rippled through the gathering. "This association may cost you," someone warned. He nodded once. "Then it will cost me." That was all. No defense, no apology, no retreat. London, for once, had nothing clever to say. By nightfall, he was on the road again, not fleeing, returning. The village welcomed him with quiet familiarity. No titles followed him here, only intention. He knocked. The widow opened the door, her expression unreadable until she saw his eyes, and knew. "You came back," she said softly, "as promised." They sat at the table where letters had once lived between them. Now there was no paper, no ink, no distance to hide behind. "I will not offer you rescue," he said, "nor protection disguised as generosity. I offer you choice, partnership, truth." She held his gaze, steady and strong. "I never wanted a savior," she replied, "only someone who saw me." "I do," he said, "completely." Silence followed, the good kind. Then she smiled. "I suppose," she said lightly, "this is where the story becomes scandalous." He laughed. Genuinely, "London will recover." They spoke late into the night, of fears, of boundaries, of hopes carefully earned. When he finally reached for her hand, she did not pull away. Love When chosen freely needs no permission. Months later, London would whisper again, but differently. A duke who married not for fortune, but for respect. A duchess who entered society without surrendering herself. A child who laughed freely in halls, once closed to her. Healing had many forms, and redemption, it seemed, could arrive disguised as a mistake. Reflection. This story began with desperation. A mother, a candle, a letter sent to the wrong address, yet perhaps it was never wrong at all. Sometimes the path to love is not found through intention, but through courage, dignity, and the willingness to choose truth over fear. If this story touched you, brought comfort, or simply kept you company, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who loves emotional stories. And if you wish, leave a comment. Your thoughts matter more than you know, and I truly love reading them. Thank you for listening. Until the next story.